Some time back, I noticed something. A game from my past had been blowing up online. A particular indie game from Russia had been gaining popularity and suddenly had a larger following than I had ever expected it to. In a short period, I was seeing all kinds of fan art, videos, and interest groups springing up around the game. And I wasn't exactly sure if I was comfortable with this development. I wasn't maddened by this, but I was surprised. I was especially surprised considering that it happened to Pathologic. I understand that this is the result of a culmination of different factors that has resulted with the injection of new members into the little cult following that I was a part of. The primary cause for this expansion being due to 3 videos posted on YouTube, see Mandalore Gaming, Hbomberguy, and Saulmatul, a so-called spiritual sequel/reimagining, and an HD re-release of the original game. I was in no way opposed to this newfound popularity, but I will admit to being slightly perturbed by some of their actions. Then again, if any fan base grows large enough, you are going to be forced to add a /fiction subset to the members. However, I will say that I was quite heartened by this new membership, because an expansion in the fan base meant that we could now have a more varied discussion about the game. If you're watching this, it's most likely because you're already familiar with Pathologic in some way, shape, or form. But, for the uninitiated, allow me to provide you with a brief synopsis. Pathologic was a game produced by a small team of Russian developers called Ice Pick Lodge. The game is set during an unknown period of time in a town located far into the Russian steppe. The town in the game has its own singular sense of tradition, architecture, and history, making it a location that feels unique, foreign, and mysterious. The player takes on the role of one of 3 different healers: a bachelor of medicine, a shamanistic folk surgeon, known as a Haruspex, and a miracle-working faith healer referred to as the Changeling. Each have found themselves fatalistically drawn to the town just in time to witness the resurgence of an old menace, a deadly plague known as the Sand Pest. It is then up to the player to guide their chosen healer through 12 days of being trapped in the town, attempting to survive through lockdowns, street violence, price inflation, seemingly sentient clouds of disease, and, quite possibly the deadliest thing of all, a collection of charlatans, megalomaniacs, career criminals, drug addicts, instinctually violent fiends, and insane individuals who have managed to worm their way into positions of great influence within the walls of the town. If this game sounds fun to you, understand that it isn't. It was purposefully made to be unfun. The Pathologic Instruction Manual actually introduces the game as being a simulator of a human being behavior in the condition of pandemic. I've heard the game described as being a torture device. This is a program that was built to be as unfun as humanly possible, and it shows with its crude design, strange dialogue, intentionally overbearing survival mechanics, rage-inducing janky combat, oppressively uninviting atmosphere, and unforgiving gameplay. Seriously, you can get yourself stuck in situations where you will be required to reload a save file from 3 in-game days ago just so you can try to prepare yourself for the crap you're going to have to wade through. One of the early reviews for the English release of Pathologic, written by John Walker for Eurogamer, described it as oblivion with cancer, a statement that could have only been made by someone who has never played Morrowind. This is a game that you do not play to have fun. But, if that is the case, then why would anyone want to play it? The answer to that question is actually rather obvious. People play Pathologic to feel anything that isn't fun. It is the gaming equivalent of challenging yourself to see how long you can hold your hand over a hot stove. You're definitely going to get burned. But aren't you at least a little curious to see how long you can last? I know that last statement sounds confusing, and is contradictory with the popular conception of what a game is supposed to be, but keep in mind that we are not dealing with a game here. We are working with an experimental simulation/torture device. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm still going to call it a game. So why the prolonged introduction to a video that is only going to focus on a singular aspect of this game? Because nothing about Pathologic can be easily summed up in a few words. As I mentioned at the start of this essay, the Pathologic fanbase had experienced a bit of a boom a few years ago, thus leading to an explosion in articles, forums, and videos dedicated to the discussion of the game. Just on the subject of video discourse, there's a very entertaining playthrough of the Bachelor scenario put together by Codex Entry and some friends. Payheadnorth has a multi-part video series about the endings of Pathologic, trying to determine if one of them could be considered the best ending. Toki dorito has produced a lovely short animatic for the song Sweet Hibiscus Tea by Penelope Scott, featuring characters and locations from the game. Turaform attempted to perform a series of building inspections on some of the more noteworthy locations in the town. And just as a point of interest, who knew a game about curing a plague would be so damn memeable? With all of this discourse and content floating around and being developed, it leads me to ask one question. Why hasn't anyone made a video focusing on my favorite part of the game? I'm not talking about the absurdist narrative, I'm not talking about the intrigue and twists that the plot involves, not even the fact that you can still use console commands to turn on God mode, fly around, and summon endless amounts of rifle ammo into your inventory as if you were some kind of post-World War I Russian super Lee Harvey Oswald.
Come on, Zabarov. You have to step out sometime. You can't hide from me forever.
No, none of that. As soon as I mention it, everyone who's played the game will know exactly what I'm talking about. The theater scene. Why haven't more people talked about the theater scene? I've made this video essay as a means of solving my own problem. So please, sit back and enjoy my overly analyzed, spoiler-ridden examination of the first 3 minutes and 13 seconds of some of the best interactive Russian literature that has ever been created. After you open the executable file, watch the confusing introductory cinematic about children holding a funeral for a rather large stuffed doll, and enjoy one of the most rave-inducing main menu themes in all of video game history, you select the New Game option from the menu, and after a brief loading screen, are dropped into a theater where a calm male voice asks,
So, it's all about trickery to you?
This is how every game of Pathologic begins. Not with a tutorial, no expository cinematic, no press X to skip, no description of the controls, nothing. The player is dropped in one corner of a theater balcony with a performance just beginning to their left. For many, this whole experience is somewhat jarring, Because not only are you unceremoniously starting in a theater, presumably expected to witness the performance that is currently taking place, but this isn't even a cutscene. The player has full first-person control over their camera, able to move and look around with their mouse and keyboard. Fortunately, this is a scene that is easily skipped simply by walking across the gallery to the door that waits on the other side. I used to skip this scene all the time, now I never do. I purposefully sit through all 3 minutes of stiff voice acting and distant character models, and I enjoy the little show. After watching it so many times, I started to notice a few things about the scene and started asking a few questions. One of the first being, who exactly is the person we're controlling? For a moment, pretend that this is your first time playing Pathologic and you are going into the whole experience blind. You begin the game, and the first thing that happens is that you go straight from a loading screen to being on a balcony where you watch 3 people argue on a stage. You have no idea who these characters are. Parts of their speech are a little difficult to make out due to their voices echoing around the empty space, and anything you can hear clearly makes little sense. It's almost as if they're speaking in nothing but riddles and metaphors. The play ends, the stage lights dim, and a lone lamp turns on to your right, illuminating the exit door. You wander to the door, whack the action key, and you are greeted with the character selection screen. You mouse over each of the 3 faces that stare out at you, reading their descriptions, and it dawns upon you these 3 faces belong to the 3 characters that you saw on the stage. The combination of the stage performance and the descriptions for these characters on the selection screen are designed to give you a very rounded idea of the 3 playable healers, their personalities, and a glimpse into their methods. With these 3 individuals out of the way, we are then left to ask who the 4th body in the theater is. Who was the person holding the camera during the performance? We know that at the very start of the sequence that a player is controlling a person and not just a bodiless camera. When a key is pressed for movement, we hear footsteps, and the camera bounces about with the sway of a body. The camera definitely acts as if you were playing a character. There is definitely someone in the theater watching this play. Some folks might suggest that during the scene the player has taken on the role of one of the more mysterious characters from the game, namely one of the overly expressive tragedians or dread-inducing executors. Perhaps you've taken on the form of the elusive but demanding powers that be. Personally, I like to go with the simplest answer. The person behind the camera is none other than the player themselves. Ice Pick Lodge designed the theater sequence to be played from the perspective of the person sitting in front of the screen with their fingers on the keyboard. This little scene is their way of throwing the player headfirst into the world of the game with a rousing smack to the back of the head, poorly translated dialogue, and graphics that could make MechWarrior 2 look like Crysis. Additionally, throughout the game, it is hinted that everything that happens could be viewed as nothing but a play, a performance that has been scripted and put on by actors, and the player just so happens to be one of them. For obvious proof of this, the Bachelor is confronted by 2 actors within 5 minutes of starting his scenario who flat out state that this is a play and you are a player. However, the player is in the unique position of being allowed the opportunity to choose which role they wish to play, so in this way the performance that is being put on at the start could almost be interpreted as the characters auditioning for the opportunity to be chosen. The 4th character in the theater is the player, alone in the dark. The performance on stage is being put on only for them. and the directors of this show do hope that the audience enjoys repeat performances. Anybody who's gotten through the first 3 minutes of Pathologic will already know the characters standing on the stage. During their performance in the theater, these 3 healers wander about the stage, boldly delivering their lines to one another and the player. It is during this scene that we get the greatest insight into each character, their personalities, their desires, and what they precisely think of their compatriots. The Bachelor, Daniil Dankovsky, an intelligent and logically minded medical researcher and practitioner who leaves his lab in the capital to chase after a possible answer to his question of how to defeat death itself. However, his plans take a drastic turn, so armed with a snakeskin coat, Gladstone bag, and acerbic wit, Daniil must try his best to bring an end to a plague while being dragged into local politics. Daniil's arrogant attitude, accusations, and frequent injections of Latin reveal him to be a very urbane, well-educated, and demanding person who has allowed his past accomplishments to go to his head, inflating his ego to the point where the only thing that matters to him is himself and his goals. Everyone and everything else are simply obstructions placed in his path to slow him down. He's also suggested to be the first character for any new player. The Haruspeks. Artemi Burak, the only son of a much revered shaman and healer who returns to his hometown at the insistence of his father. Artemi sees the plague as an opportunity to reintegrate himself into the ancient traditions of his native people and their mysterious practices, and prove his eligibility to inherit his father's legacy. Artemi is revealed to be a man of few words, having the least to say among the 3 during the scene. But what he does say is stern and direct, having very few questions, unafraid to make demands, and even less concerned to issue threats. The Haruspeks doesn't accuse. He insults. He announces himself as being a surgeon. Artemi is a man who is dangerous, and he wants everyone to know just how dangerous he can be. It is near the end of their recital that Artemi speaks the phrase that will always be closely associated to him in my mind.
Any choice is right as long as it's willed. That's the truth of the matter.
And lastly, the changeling, Clara. A mysterious girl who wakes up in an open grave with no memories of her past, where she came from, or how she ended up in a hole on the outskirts of town. All she knows is that there's something special about her, and everything is not as it seems. She moves about the stage the most of the 3, gesturing to address the empty balconies as if they were full. Her tone of voice contains a snideness that makes her critique of the other 2 even more cutting. She speaks of future possibilities with unwavering certainty, as if convinced that she holds exact knowledge of what will happen after the end of their play, almost as if she were the only person who had read to the end of the script rather than just to the end of the scene they were going into. It should be noted that twice during this scene, Clara commits one of the great sins of stage performance. She turns her back to the audience. There's a great amount of meaning attached to this action, which I will discuss later on. Just for now, be aware that her actions on stage portray Clara as a character who holds a vastly different understanding of the world than Daniil and Artemi. So now that we are familiar with all of the characters present in the theater, we can move on to what is likely the most unnecessary, least interesting, but longest part of this essay that I insisted on including because it was the inspiration for this whole project. This is admittedly the longest section of the video, and I am going to make it even longer by doing something a little risky. I am going to divide the Pathologic fanbase into categories. I'm not doing this to create some form of purity test, but to instead show that there are different levels of understanding within the fanbase. This doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it does go to show how the fanbase can be differentiated based on their level of engagement. The first group are those who have only played the Pathologic remake, titled Pathologic 2. These folks most likely received their introduction to Pathologic by watching one of the previously mentioned YouTube videos and deciding to jump into the remake because the original seemed a little too impenetrable. Because I'm talking about the original Pathologic here, the people who will fall into this category will most likely have the lowest level of understanding towards what I am going to be talking about. The second group consists of those who have played Pathologic Classic HD, the fixed version of the game, which came out in 2015. This is one of the games that I'll mostly be talking about, so anyone who's played this game will be perfectly familiar with a lot of what I am about to say. The third group are those who have played the original Pathologic, the one that came out in 2005. Time for a little history. Pathologic was originally released in Russia in 2005 and received an official English translation in the same year. However, the game at the time had problems, numerous bugs, crashes, gameplay was harsher, the characters moved slower, and the visuals were of poor quality, even by 2005 standards. But what had to be the most complained about aspect of the game at the time was its translation. In a review by YouTuber Sexbad, he says,
"All of this storytelling brilliance comes with one caveat though, specifically one for people who can't speak Russian. The writing is strong and nuanced, at least from what I can tell, but Pathologic is an under-budget Russian game with a script that touches the clouds when stacked. As a result, the translation to English is pretty poor, and while most of the flaws lie in really simple grammatical or spelling mistakes that anyone can still understand, parts of the dialogue lose nearly all meaning at the fault of some translator who really didn't understand English. This isn't much of a problem for me because I know enough Russian to understand some of the sentence structure that didn't get rebuilt properly in English, but it still took some work to understand some of the characters at certain points. I don't think it's game-breaking, but it's definitely a problem, and it can definitely hinder your understanding of the game."
One of the main changes that came with the 2015 HD re-release, besides the numerous bug fixes and the improved visuals, was a complete retranslation of the entire game in an attempt to make it slightly more understandable. And this is exactly what everyone who's ever played the original version of Pathologic will have noticed when they booted up Classic HD. However, as with every experience I've had reading between two different translations of a text, what one translation loses, the other might retrieve. And this is what we find with the two translations of Pathologic. Information that was missing in one of them exists in the other. So by comparing the two translations of the same scene, a deeper understanding of the game's opening sequence can be developed. Thanks to YouTube user Lungblossom, we have a video which compiles all of the different translations of the opening scene in the theater, including the original Russian, the 2005 and 2015 English translations, as well as the German and Bulgarian translations as well. I will be focusing on the translation presented in Pathologic Classic HD, and will be frequently comparing it to the original release. Also, because it's going to get a little tiresome saying the word Pathologic every time I have to refer to two different translations, I am mainly going to try referring to the two English translations as Original and Classic HD. This isn't going to be a complete line-by-line comparison because much of what is said in each script covers a lot of the same ground. With that out of the way, let's start the show. Going back to the beginning of the scene, the player finds themselves at the far end of a theater balcony where they are immediately greeted with the words,
So, it's all about trickery to you? Wherever have you come from?
These are the first words we hear spoken by the character of Danil Dankovsky, our urbane bachelor, who wastes no time in questioning another character's values. This question is directed towards the changeling, Clara. Clara is essentially a faith healer. She uses an innate supernatural power that is hard to explain or comprehend, and she takes on a rather messiah-like position within the city and the game, being referred to as a saint and devotress by other characters. Compare this line from Danil to the original translation.
So you are Vataris of Ruse. Where on earth did you come from?
And here we see the first major departure, the loss of the word adherent. In the classic HD translation, Danil's opening question to Clara is posed as an inquiry towards her values, that she is a character who is not to be trusted because of a personal ideal that she appears to hold. With the original, however, Danil accuses her of being an adherent of ruse, something to imply that Clara is not just a person who's okay with deceit and lies, but a person who has devoted themselves to a particular philosophy or ideology which holds deceit and lies as a central component. The depiction of Clara being a trickster is also very striking, considering that Clara is supposed to be a new mistress for the town, and as such should be incapable of telling lies, which certainly is hinted at in the game, because whenever she tries to tell a lie, the universe of the game world warps itself in order to force her lies into becoming the truth. Or at least that's what's happening in my interpretation. It should be noted that Danil, at this moment, could also be accusing Clara of being a charlatan or a con. Then again, it's hard to find a faith healer in our world who isn't already running some sort of con. Immediately following his question, Clara gives her response. From Classic HD,
No. I detest trickery, but if we ourselves are to suffer deception, our hands are no longer tied. Where are we?
This line bears very little difference to its equivalent in the original translation, but it is still significant because it is the first instance of a character using a variation of the phrase, "untie my hands." This phrase bears some importance in the original translation and will be made reference to by the other characters, but it is still significant to all of them. Each character is a different sort of medical practitioner, requiring their hands to do their job of healing the sick and injured. However, in the context of Clara's statement, it takes on a new meaning. If we are to suffer deception, our hands are no longer tied. That is to say, if those around us choose to deal with us in lies and tricks, then we should have no responsibility for the consequences our actions may bring. It's a bit of a strange thought, but it makes sense in a Milgram experiment sort of way. After Clara, we get the first words from Artemy, the Haruspex.
Well, the muscular contraction is there. Means you're already inside of him. This must be one of the ventricles, right here.
This statement appears to be completely unrelated to the conversation that's already in progress between Danil and Clara, but it is actually Artemy answering Clara's question as to where they are. It is also Artemy providing for us a brief piece of foreshadowing that particularly relates to his scenario. Artemy speaks as if they are standing inside of a giant heart, watching it pulse and pump around them. He speaks of a him, but gives no name. In my opinion, Artemy is implying that they are standing in, or just outside of, the heart of Bus Turok, the mythological giant bull that, according to steppe lore, the town has been built upon. This statement is also relevant to the location of the scene, because just behind the theater is a manhole which leads to a series of tunnels filled with red dirt that run through the whole town. Artemy is not just stating his belief that the town is linked to Bus Turok, but that the theater is sitting either inside, on top of, or is actually the heart of the great bull. Clara responds,
What a silly place. It's stuffed. So it's not real for now? I don't think it has started yet.
Again, most of the statement is similar to the original translation, except for one little bit.
What an absurd place. It's just a piece of taxidermy. This means everything isn't for real yet. Looks like it hasn't started.
Here we see a prime example of something that was lost in translation. Having Clara simply state it's stuffed gives no real idea as to what she's referring to. Many things can be stuffed: people after a meal, rooms, vehicles, luggage. But if we look into the original translation, we are given the context. It's just a piece of taxidermy. Clara is flat out saying that everything around them is fake. A mockery of life that is filled with none of the stuff that would actually make them real. This point of difference in the translation is only further shown when one looks at the German translation of this statement and finds that Clara again uses the word taxidermy.
Welch ein absurder Ort! Das ist einfache Taxidermie!
Then, not to be left out, Daniil speaks up again.
Does it matter what it's made of? It's definitely struggling. We need to perform Sectio Transversalis. Cut the wall. There's no other way out. What else is there to do?
Compared to the original translation,
Does it matter at all what he's made of? It's already absolutely clear to me. Something is disturbed in it. We'll have to make Sectio Transversalis to him. Let's scarify the wall. Otherwise we won't be able to get out of here. What else can be done?
again, there are a few differences that need to be pointed out. Firstly, in the original translation, Daniil acknowledges the presence of Bus Turok, but doesn't care about his existence. While in Classic HD, Daniil refers to their surroundings strictly as an it, does not care what it is made out of, but does show concern that it appears to be struggling with something. Seeing that something is disturbing and that something is struggling is another instance of two translations implying two different but related concepts. I can walk into a room and notice that something has been disturbed. I can talk to someone on the phone and the tone of their voice or their way of speaking might hint at them being disturbed. I can wake up in the morning and be overcome with a disturbing feeling. However, if I see something struggling, that is not only a good indication that something is wrong, but that there is difficulty in trying to deal with it. The insertion of the word struggle into the Classic HD translation seems to provide a greater sense of urgency to their situation. It should also be noted that during this statement, Daniil not only foreshadows his own near future, but provides a great insight into his character by stating that his first option, and the only option he sees, is to try and make an escape. This is reflected on the second day of his scenario, where Daniil can join in on a plot to try and escape the town upon realizing that a pandemic is going to break out, only to have his plans foiled when he arrives at the train station just to be told that it has been shut down, no trains can leave, and anyone who tries to leave will be shot on sight. Daniil's desire to escape actually blinds him to the point where he displays a total disregard for the consequences of his actions. He sees that something is wrong. He can see his surroundings struggling, but his first choice is to cut through a wall in order to make an escape route, completely unconcerned with what he might be cutting into or what lies through the incision he might make. Clara then exclaims,
I know what to do. Those who favor hard logic and direct action are bound to be misguided. Only a miracle can set us free without us having to destroy something. And I can do miracles. Just let me.
This statement combines a jab at both Daniil and Artemy and a blatant self-promotion. It's pretty clear that Clara's statement of those who favor hard logic and direct action is a pointed reference to Daniil and Artemy respectively, how their staunch adherence to logic or action will only end with them suffering from constant deceptions. Another lovely little bit of foreshadowing, considering how Daniil gets used by the ruling families and the Inquisitor to further their own political goals, and Artemy who gets strung along by the foreman of the abattoir through a series of suicidal tests, one of which requires Artemy to literally jump down a hole to his own death. She then follows this jab with a declaration that they'll need a miracle to get through this situation, and that she is the most suited to bring about the miracle they need, being a faith healer and all. The original translation, however, goes in a different direction.
I know what to do. The one will be tricked, who is acting straightforward or thinking logically. Only by miracle it is possible to escape from here and not to ruin anything. But I can make a miracle happen. Untie my hands.
Here we see Clara not so much making a jab, but more of a roundabout promotion of herself. The phrase acting straightforward or thinking logically might still be taken as references to Daniil and Artemy, but here it isn't as apparent. Instead, it seems to more imply that logic and straightforwardness will act as detriments during the times to come. So, the best way to act is with the exact opposite ideals, namely, cunning and dishonesty. And as Daniil astutely pointed out earlier in the original translation, Clara is an adherent of such practices. We then see the use of the phrase, untie my hands, being used here as an outcry to the player, asking them to choose her so that she might go forth and bring about the miracles she proclaims to be necessary. Daniil then chides Clara.
Will you please be quiet? You're a liar and a thief. Who is going to believe you when you keep lying to yourself? The truth is my shepherd. Whatever happens, I will find answers, and justice will be restored. I will perform the operation. Medica morbo adhibe.
Between the two translations, there is again very little difference. However, there are some points that might be noted in the second half of this little speech.
Be quiet, will you? You are a thief and a liar. How can anyone believe you when you deceive yourself? And my principle is the genuine truth. No matter what happens, I will get to the truth and act by rights. Untie my hands. Medicum morbo adhibe.
First is the dichotomy between the words principle and shepherd. Principle is the more secular of the two terms, with shepherd having strong religious connotations, particularly with Christianity. But the two can still be considered similar. Both words refer to a strong guiding force or ideal. Then we come to the statement about justice and by rights. In this instance, these terms are not interchangeable. In Classic HD, Daniil seems to imply that through his pursuit of the truth, justice will naturally come to be from the result of his search. However, with the original translation, Daniil's pursuit for the truth and him acting by rights are two separate things. He promises to find the truth, and that the actions he takes will be correct and right. I will also take this moment to put in a reminder of the first words that Daniil spoke during this scene, where he accused Clara of being a trickster or an adherent of ruse. This statement that he makes here is putting him in direct opposition to Clara. The Bachelor also, at this time, uses the phrase "untie my hands," declaring his desire for the player to choose him to save the city. Artemy then has a few choice words for the noble Bachelor.
Don't you go all bossy on me, clever clogs. You will act justly, but your justice will blind you and become his demise. This calls for the gentle hand of a surgeon. Step aside, both of you.
Again, there is very little difference between the two translations, except for one slight change in wording.
Don't command around, you medic. You'll act by the rights, but your truth will blind you, and you'll just finish him off. A surgeon's sensitive hands are needed here, and you step aside.
In both translations, Artemy sees Daniil as a threat to the town. Again, the him in this statement is referring to Bus-Turak, the bull that the town was built upon. But in the classic HD translation, he claims that Daniil's justice will blind him. As I've already mentioned, in the classic HD translation, Daniil appears to view justice as being a natural result from his pursuit for the truth, meaning that this particular statement can be read as Artemy predicting that Daniil will have very little regard for the consequences of his actions. Dankovsky will simply chase after his goals, denying that any of his actions could result in anything but perfect, ideal justice. In the original translation, we see Daniil's idolization of the truth coming back into play, with Artemy seeming to imply that no matter how justly Daniil tries to act, his conceptualization of the truth will be the thing that leads him astray and causes him to do more harm than good. Then Clara pipes back in with a few choice words of her own.
Your gentle hands are used to killing, not giving life. You will inevitably do harm. As for Brainy, he has no regard for casualties at all. Neither of you knows compassion.
Once more, the two translations are near identical, except Clara calls Daniil a smartass in the original, which is kind of funny. Here, Clara gives a scathing criticism of her two comrades, basically calling out Artemy for being a murderer, and admittedly it seems that Artemy does kill a whole lot more people than cures over the course of the game, and pointing out that Daniil, either due to his indifference towards the population or his own inflated sense of self-worth, will not care for the number of dead. Which of course brings to mind a certain quote allegedly spoken by a certain Russian leader, but seriously, the daily death toll is fed to you at the end of every day as a number. They are literally making it a statistic. Then Daniil makes an observation.
Yes, it seems unlikely that we'll get along well, but there's only one truth.
This sentence is fairly simple in its understanding. Daniil is stating the obvious, then trying to bring up his unwavering faith in the power of the truth once again, to which Artemy provides a truth of his own.
Any choice is right as long as it's willed. That's the truth of the matter.
This phrase, "any choice is right as long as it is willed," is strongly associated with Artemy. He will actually say it once in a while when you go to speak with him as either Clara or Daniil, and it speaks volumes about his character. Artemy, as pointed out by Clara, is straightforward, blunt, and simple. He is not the kind of person to put too much thought into things. Artemy knows what he wants, how to get what he wants, and there is very little in the town that can stop him. In the eyes of the Harspecks, there's no point in thinking about right or wrong, truth or lies, crime or justice. The only thing that makes anything right is the fact that someone had the guts to make a decision and then act upon it. And once that decision is made, there's very little point in trying to debate whether it was right or wrong, because there's nothing that can be done to change a decision once it's been made and acted upon. Clara then gives up a little bit of her truth.
Only the heart will show you the right choice. Stop thinking about yourselves. Think of the sick. He's in pain. I can't see it yet, but I can feel it.
Again, another fairly clear statement. Clara knows that the world around them is fictional, so any choice that can be made will not matter at all. Instead of trying to make an appeal for everyone to act towards an idea of right or wrong, Clara implores them to instead follow their hearts and make choices which feel right to them. It should be noted that in this statement, Clara may also be directly addressing the player, imploring for them to do what feels right. She then follows this with another plea for mercy and more confirmation that Boosturak is actually real. The last little sentence of this line does provide a bit of characterization towards Clara, however. She can't see it, but she can feel it. This statement shows the imperfection of Clara's perspective. She does not have any evidence that she can provide to the others that could convince them to follow her way of thinking. Instead, she has only her instincts and feelings, which will sadly never be enough to convince either of them. Frustrated by all of these disagreeing opinions, Daniil states,
It's not even a trap. It's a grave. Subipsum funis sumus. Can't say I hold a soft spot for it.
This is a statement made to describe the circumstances that Daniil and the others have found themselves in. For Daniil and Artemy, their scenarios begin with both of them being led seemingly into situations that seem trap-like. Daniil comes to the city to meet with Simon Kane, only to be told that the man is dead, a plague is spreading among the population, and that he won't be able to leave for 12 days. Artemy comes to town looking for his father, Isidore, only to be ambushed at the train station and framed for his father's murder. While both of these situations can be seen as traps, Daniil, ever the pessimist, sees the whole thing in a darker tone. It isn't a trap. People can escape from traps. It's more likely that they have been led into a grave in which they will die, be buried, and remain forever. It should be noted, though, that this statement could be interpreted as a point of agreement that Daniil holds with Clara, being as how Clara begins the game inside a literal grave. Artemy then takes this moment to insert one last jab at the Bachelor.
I can see that. You're full of hate. Stuffed or not, it's breathing. I can hear it. It can be healed rather than killed.
Again, Artemy makes his disliking of Daniil obvious by pointing out how apparent Daniil is making his displeasure. We can also see one last difference in translations. In the classic HD translation, Artemy makes mention of healing twice in a rather redundant fashion. Meanwhile, in the original, he claims,
That I can see. You are full of hatred. Stuffed or not, it still breathes. I can hear it. It's possible to cure rather than kill.
The difference in this case is only one word, cure instead of heal. I prefer the use of the word cure in this situation because it makes it appear that Artemy has been very attentive to the condition of their surroundings. Clara then injects.
You mean you won't become a killer? But you will! Mark my word, that's exactly what will happen. But I can avoid it.
Once more, Clara is revealing that she knows much more about what is going to happen than the other two. Artemy is in fact required to kill others in order to finish his story. Killing other people is actually such a major component of his story that his is the only scenario that comes with a mini-game where people can practice unarmed combat and a boss fight. Clara's last statement about being able to avoid killing might be interpreted as being more about her awareness of being in a game than her actual ability to avoid murdering people. She knows that she is in a game, so can therefore perform particular actions that will technically result in her not performing a murder, like sleeping through every day until the game ends. This might also be seen as another instance of Clara being in denial as to her own imperfections. She claims to be able to avoid killing, but during one of the missions she takes on during the first day of her scenario, she literally kills a child with her own powers. Admittedly, the killing was accidental, but she was still the person who performed the act which resulted in the death of a young boy. Additionally, Clara is the character with the most limited range of usable weapons, and most of the ways she has of defending herself are ineffectual to the point where it is less frustrating to just run away rather than deal with the janky combat mechanics. It's then left to Daniil to initiate the end of the scene.
No, we won't ever get along. I suggest we be on our way. The sooner the better.
Off we go then?
Let's go. The clock is ticking.
And with those last words, the three healers make their way to the edges of the stage, the lights dim, and the scene ends. The player then simply turns to the right, where a lamp shines down upon the exit door leading out of the theater and onto the character selection screen. Of course, any proper script for the stage does not consist solely of dialogue spoken by the characters, but it also includes descriptions for how the stage is to be set and the actions that the actors must perform. The stage, in this scene, is almost barren, but it is still amazingly set. The back wall of the stage consists of 3 images: a blonde woman wearing a white dress, the city, and a dark-haired woman wearing a black dress. The 2 women standing to either side of the city are Nina Kana, the woman in the black dress, and Victoria Olginskaya, the woman in the white dress. 2 of the city's 3 mistresses, who, at the beginning of the game, are already dead. The presence of these 2 women and the missing third hold a great deal of significance to the scene at play. By going through the game, the player will learn that the town's 3rd woman of power, Katerina Sabrova, isn't actually a real mistress. The dreams and visions that she experiences are a combination of hallucinations brought about by her opioid addiction and the words of the rat prophet being whispered into her ear. In reality, at the start of the game, it is actually Clara who is the true 3rd mistress. I use the phrase true mistress in this case because at the start of the game, the 2 other characters who might hold the same position, Maria Kana and Capella, are only candidates. They have not yet ascended to the position of mistress. The argument could be made that Maria Kana, while introduced as being the next best thing to a mistress at the start of the beginning of Pathologic, and is acknowledged by many people as being popular enough to be a mistress, doesn't actually achieve that position until much later in the game. Capella has inherited a degree of power from her deceased mother, but not many people actually acknowledge her as being a mistress due to her age. As a result, the only people who really pay attention to Capella and what she has to say are the children of the city, her father, the 3 healers, and the player. This means that during this scene, the 3 true mistresses of the city have gathered in one place: Nina, Victoria, and Clara. The image of the city is to show that it too has a role to play, that even though our attention is on the 3 actors, the city is still there, dead in the center. While it might be larger than all 3 of the actors, it is still in miniature, giving a sense of just how big the three actors are in comparison to the inhabitants of such a small town. Then, with the images of the two devotresses flanking it, we can see it as a depiction of the status of these two powerful women. On the stage, which projects outwards to the audience galleries, the only props present are a table with 3 empty chairs. To me, the image of these items is clear. It shows that the characters who will occupy the stage are at odds with one another and are going to refuse to agree. When the scene begins, all 3 characters are standing. They are there to discuss what they must do to try and resolve the problems that await them, and a table has been set up so that they might sit comfortably and take their time discussing their thoughts. But instead, each character has refused to take a seat and insists that their way is the only way. I would also like to point out the forced perspective at play on the stage. Artemy, the largest character, is standing far downstage against the wall at the back, Daniil standing close to the center of the stage, and Clara, a literal child, strides along just one step away from the front edge of the stage. The effect is that Daniil and Artemy look to be approximately the same size, while Clara appears to stand as tall, if not taller, than the 2 grown men. There are multiple ways of interpreting the meaning behind this effect. Firstly, that Clara is meant to stand taller than Artemy and Daniil because she is one of the 3 mistresses in the room, one of the 3 that the town reveres. Clara is a mistress, but she is a new one. So while she does stand taller than the Bachelor and the Haruspecs, she has a long way to go until she can meet the stature of the other 2 mistresses present. The second reason for this forced perspective is also tied into the image on the back wall. All 3 characters are smaller than the picture of the city, but the image of the city is cartoonish and distorted. Meanwhile, the 2 mistresses stand taller than anything else in the room. You could almost swear that at any moment, one of these giant ladies could pick up one of the actors on the stage and place them within the walls of the city, like a child would when playing with a toy doll. For those of you who have played the game, you know exactly what I am talking about. For those of you who haven't played the game, I'm not going to spoil everything in this video, but I will show these 2 images and allow your imagination to fill in the rest. Lastly, I would like to speak on the positions of the characters and their actions upon the stage. Starting at the back, we see Artemy standing against the wall, leaning on the image of the city. From a distance, he's almost hard to make out, the browns and greens and grays of his clothes acting almost as a camouflage that blends him into the picture. The whole thing speaks very clearly to me. Artemy is one with the city, and the city is one with him. He was born in this place, and despite leaving, he will have no problem returning to find his position within it. He is supported by the city, and in the same way the city is supported by him. This idea is made stronger by the fact that everything Artemy does over the course of his scenario is working towards the goal of finding his place among his people, and to rescue the city from both the Sand Pest and those who would see it destroyed. His canon ending is brought about by choosing to save the city itself by destroying the Polyhedron, a landmark that stands uniquely apart from anything else the city has on show. In fact, the Polyhedron isn't even seen in the city backdrop. Isn't that a little odd? Daniil stands stock straight and still at the stage center left, close to a set of stairs. He stands apart from the other characters and objects to show one of the core traits that has been attributed to Daniil. He is essentially alone. He arrives to the city alone, Most of the people he interacts with are more than happy to deceive and lead him astray in attempts to achieve their own goals. Hardly any of the townsfolk listen to what he has to say, and when they do pay attention to him, they are likely to misunderstand his directions and advice. A woman, who is romantically interested in him, commits suicide, and the only people he seems to be able to form any sort of bond with are either outcasts, eccentrics, or criminals. There is a 40-second cutscene dedicated to showing Daniil getting punched in his smug face by a tightly knit community. The town, for all intents and purposes, rejects his presence. Daniil is a lonely figure, which means that he has to find it within himself to stand alone. As well, it's not a coincidence that Daniil is standing on that particular side of the stage. Why is that? Look at the image of the city at the back. The most prominent building in that picture is that of the church, located in the Stoneyard district. In the game, if you stand in front of that church and look to the right, what do you see? Now, where is Daniil standing? Also, with his obsession with saving himself and escaping, is it any wonder why Daniil is the one character standing closest to a set of stairs? Lastly, there's Clara. Clara is different from the other two in that she is the most animated on the stage. She paces back and forth while the other two hold their ground. Clara's positioning so far upstage shows two things. Firstly, that she is the one character who starts the furthest from any part of the city, starting the game in one of the more remote locations on the map, in a freshly dug grave inside of the town's graveyard. The second thing that this shows is that Clara is free to move. Her story takes her to every possible known nook and cranny in the town, while the Bachelor and Haruspex will work primarily in a few locations. Clara occasionally stops and holds her arms out, either to her sides or in front of her, a posture similar to the images of the mistresses on either side of the stage, creating another point of relation between Clara and the two others. Next, for most of her time on the stage, Clara does not look towards the gallery where the player is located. She instead looks to either side of the stage or turns her back to the audience to directly address the other two characters. This is important because unlike Daniil or Artemy, who are playing out their parts in the show, Clara addresses them as if she was trying to convince them to act otherwise. Clara is the only character on the stage who acknowledges that she is a character in a play, then fails to convince the other characters of the same. The only time Clara actually faces the audience, it is to say one thing.
You mean you won't become a killer? But you will! Mark my word, that's exactly what will happen. But I can avoid it.
These words might have been written to annoy Artemy, but they are spoken to the player, so they might become a sort of warning. She is essentially telling the player, you, the person sitting in front of the screen watching this play, you will become a killer. If you choose to take on the role of either the Bachelor or the Haruspex, then you will have no choice but to become a murderer. However, she ends it with an invitation. You don't have to become a killer. If you choose my path, then it might be possible for us to save the day without any suffering. But when you think about it, doesn't that sound like something a whole lot of people from other religions tell people they're trying to sway towards their particular brand of worship? But then again, Clara does end up killing a child on her first day, so yeah. What was that old phrase about good intentions again? Lastly, just as the show ends and all three characters decide to go their own way, each character chooses a different part of the stage to exit from as the lights dim. While Artemy turns to the left set of stairs, and Anil goes for the right, Clara kneels down to the front edge of the stage in preparation for a hop down. Not only does this show the resolve of each character to go their own direction, but it is another display of Clara's unique character. Clara doesn't leave the stage by conventional means, the way that the actors are meant to, but instead makes her exit towards the audience, as if she plans to join them in watching the rest of the show. This could almost be considered a form of fourth wall breaking performed by Clara, an act which falls in line with her character's status as the most self-aware of the three. With that, the lights fade, and the game can begin. At the end of it all, this is either proof that a near Kubrickian level of detail has been put into this short production, or I'm just overanalyzing 3 minutes from a game that was released almost 2 decades ago. Either way, I believe that I've made my case, and will leave it up to you to decide for yourselves if I'm way off mark, if you agree with my interpretation, or if I've succumbed to my delusions and deserve to be institutionalized. I'll leave the debates, ad hominems, extrapolations, and bot jargon for the comment section. Thank you very much for sitting through all this. Have a good one.